I'd sat on it and I thought, eventually I want to work in-house. Was waiting for the right opportunity because I was enjoying the work that I was doing in the various firms that I've worked in. But I thought, when the right opportunity comes along, this is what I want to do. Fast forward to the MS diagnosis, and then my mantra changed completely to why wait? So I stopped putting anything off that I'd maybe deferred previously, thinking there's all the time in the world.
Law school taught you the law, but it didn't teach you this, how to connect. Be that one lawyer who shows up different, the one clients trust, the one they never forget. I'm Neal Goldstein, and this is That One Lawyer Podcast. Let's get started. My guest today is Alex Wilson, a solicitor based in London, senior director and head of strategy for the International Advisory Legal Team at CBRE, which is the world's largest commercial real estate services firm. She's also the Law Society Council member representing disabled solicitors across England and Wales. In 2016, Alex was diagnosed with relapsing-remitting multiple sclerosis. What do with that diagnosis is not what most people would expect. And that's exactly why she's here. Alex, welcome to That One Lawyer.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Great to meet you, Neil.
It's very good to meet you. And I know we have a time differential. You're in the UK. By the way, is it raining?
Always. It's always
Yes.
raining. It's always a fair assumption for the UK.
By the way, I asked you that because I actually did look at the weather and I was hoping to say, oh, you're having a sunny day. So I'm sorry that it's raining, but as you said, you're used to it. So let's move forward here. You know, there is a story you told about a childhood visit to Liverpool Crown Court, some kind of faded Polaroid of you in a barrister's wig. Take me back to that moment. What did that feel like for a kid? And did you actually believe back then that law was going to be your path?
Absolutely is the answer to that. I can't remember how old I was, probably no more than 7 or 8. No lawyers in the family, nobody working in legal services at all. I think I'd probably seen law represented in TV shows or something and thought, this sounds like what I want to do. My dad was actually an expert witness at one point, and I was very young, went along with him to the offices, and I
Oh,
thought, yes,
cool.
this all sounds very fun. So yes, originally I did want to be a barrister because I felt that was more on with my limited knowledge as a very young child, but it felt like you were more on the front line with people, and that's why I love my role, because it's working with people. So I did want to be a barrister. I went to the Crown Court open day and I got to try on the wig, got to sit on the bench, and I thought this suits me. I like this idea of a career. And then of course now became a solicitor and realized it's just as many connections with people and building really good relationships.
So you knew relatively early that you wanted to work in-house rather than at a traditional firm. That's actually unusual. Most solicitors come to that later in their careers. What was pulling you in that direction?
When I started out, so I trained at Osborne Clarke in Bristol, in southwest England. And when I started out, of course, you start in the first couple of weeks thinking, I want to be a partner. I want to, that's the aim, because that's all I really knew at that stage. But very early on, I did think, actually, there's something about handing off the work to the business at the end of your one-off ad hoc transaction. And I thought I'd quite like to keep with that work and see it through from start to finish,
Right.
which you don't really get to do so much in private practice compared to in-house. So I'd sat on it and I thought, eventually I want to work in-house. Was waiting for the right opportunity because I was enjoying the work that I was doing in the various firms that I've worked in. But I thought, when the right opportunity comes along, this is what I want to do. Fast forward to the MS diagnosis, and then my mantra changed completely to why wait? So I stopped putting anything off that I'd maybe deferred previously, thinking there's all the time in the world. And I still really truly believe that there is lots more time available, but that
Yes.
mindset shift made me look more seriously at moving in-house. And I have to say it's the best thing I've ever done. Being in-house compared to private practice is very much the route that I prefer.
So I think you might have already answered it because it looks like you were able to get a sneak preview of my notes. But walk me through the career before CBRE. You trained at Osborne Clarke in Bristol. You worked in Guernsey,
Yes,
then London, and
correct. Yes.
I think you worked for News UK, correct?
That's right. Yes, that was
Yep.
my first in-house role.
That's a pretty varied road to travel. What did you learn during the way? And you might have answered this, but what did you specifically did you learn during the way about yourself as a lawyer?
One thing that I learned very early on, actually, when I moved to Guernsey, which is quite a strange career move for most people to move offshore to the Channel Islands. It's a very, very small island, 7 miles long, 3 miles wide, which is full of financial services sector industry. I moved there because there was no work in London at that time. It was 2013. There was a mini financial crisis, and it made me realize that if the choice is between staying with law but moving to something slightly unexplored for me, or moving into a very different career path temporarily until the legal markets pick up, I wanted to stay with the law. So made that move, which seemed bizarre to many at the time, but did that. And then again, I've tended to move when the opportunity has come along that feels like a right fit. So it was the right time to move back to the UK and to work in London after I spent a couple of years in house. Sorry, a couple of years in Guernsey. And decided to make that move in house. As I say, I got this why wait mentality that then made me think, right, this seems to be the right opportunity. It's a brand I've heard of with News Corp, News UK, very high profile. You can't literally walk down the street without seeing something to do with News Corp or News UK, or I'll certainly open the newspapers, the titles that they operate. But one thing I also learned is that despite the media and real estate seeming very, very different areas of the world and areas of the sectors, there's so many transferable skills. When you have that mindset of commercial, corporate, legal, it's transferable to lots of different sectors. So it's
Right.
no less exciting within real estate, I would say, than working in News Corp, News UK.
So let's talk about the moment that you were diagnosed with MS. Was that May of 2016?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
Okay. And so you get I'm assuming you have some level of symptoms and you go from one doctor to another probably. And
yeah.
what was actually going through your mind in those first days? Not the version you might tell, at panels, but what's really going in your mind when you first hear the words multiple sclerosis?
It was first mentioned to me in the January of 2016. That's when I had the first identifiable
Right.
symptoms and thought
Right.
something strange. I couldn't see properly immediately. It was very, very quick transition. Couldn't see properly out of one eye. I had very weird altered sensations.
Yeah.
And it's scary in those
Yeah.
early days when you think, what's happening to me? Is this normal? Is it just because I'm tired? I've got low blood sugar. Of
Right.
course, try and rationalize it with things that
Right.
are my frames of reference. I didn't know anybody
Right.
with MS.
Sure. Sure.
It was mentioned by the first doctor, as you say, very much my history there is moving from one hospital, one specialist to another until you get diagnosed. So that somebody mentioned to me MS, and in my head it was the same as motor neuron disease, is that the M's, and I thought, I don't know what this is. I don't know anybody with this. I've got no experiences that I can say to somebody, "Oh, I know you have MS. What does it mean for you?"
Right.
So it was quite unknown early on for me, and different things started to happen. Everything corrected itself within a couple of weeks because, as you say, it's relapsing remitting, but unexplained conditions happening and seeing having double vision at one point, perfect double vision in focus was quite a strange symptom.
Right.
And because it was a collection of weird symptoms without a name for the first few months, it's hard to explain to somebody when they say, "How are you feeling?" Strange is the answer to that question. Not fatigue, obviously, is one of the key factors of anybody with MS. That's something that most people have. So tired, certainly I could say to people, but just confused. What does this mean? What does the future look like when I've now got these very strange, unexplored symptoms? Then when the diagnosis came in, it was actually a bit of a relief. When I read that letter, and it was a letter that I had to pick up from the hospital, oh, this has a name, and it has a name, and it has a treatment path, and there isn't a cure, of course, but there is a way forward. Uh, and getting that was a relief. And just gave me a bit more certainty, a bit more clarity, and the treatment started quite quickly after that. So I had a neurology team, most of whom I still speak to today, 10 years on.
Right.
And it's just far more certainty at that point. So that was the relief setting, which I hear a lot of people with MS say actually, is when you get the name and you get the letter, you think, okay, well, now I'm in the system.
You know, I want to share something with our listeners who may not already know. My mother had MS, and it's part of my book, Who's in the Waiting Room. And one thing I learned watching that MS, is not one thing. It affects everyone completely differently.
Yeah.
And some people have different parts of their body affected. Some people have all the parts of their body affected. And some people could go years with nothing that happens and everything it seems to be normal. So can you describe for us your version of it actually, how it actually feels like day to day, so people listening really understand what you're really managing?
Yeah, so I guess MS itself is a blockage within the nerves. So that the myelin sheath, which wraps around the nerves, there is a blockage which stops signals from the brain to, as you say, certain parts of the body. In my case, I think I have about 12 of these at the last count on the last MRI
Wow.
scan.
Wow.
But the number doesn't necessarily correlate to how unwell you might feel. I remember the neurologist said to me, "You can have one, and you can be bedbound because of where that blockage is in the nerves."
Wow.
Uh, so for me, it's the right hand side of my body. So nothing. I run, I row. It's not day to day. I can do all of these things. It just feels different. It's altered sensations on the right hand side of my body. Humidity is not my friend anymore. It was never particularly great, but I think probably my days of long trips to Southeast Asia or to Louisiana or somewhere might be behind me, because it's difficult when I'm in a humid environment. I struggle to walk. So I do lose my footing a little bit. So no marathons in far-flung places anytime soon. And the fatigue is managed more so now. Only recently I've been put on a different drug, which has helped with that. So they're the sort of everyday symptoms. Sometimes something will happen and I think, is it the MS? Is it not the MS? And it just corrects itself. So it could very well have been.
You know, you know what's interesting with my mother, who, God, when you mention, MRIs determining which neurons or which nerves are being affected is amazing. That's not something that happened even 20 years ago. And, you know, it's a difficult illness even today
Yes.
to predict what will happen in a week, in a month, in 6 months and a year, and it's tough to live your life that way, but you have no choice, as we'll get into in a little while about your own philosophy about, how to live your life. You've talked about fatigue, optic neuritis, symptoms that come and go. On a day when things are rough, and I'm sure you have those days, and you still have a call with a legal team, whether it's in Stockholm or a council meeting at the Law Society. How do you handle that?
I think being open and being transparent has helped me, actually. There are two ways you can go about this. You can think it's not happening to me, it's not ruling my life, therefore I don't want to talk about it with people, I don't want to share it, I'll just almost forget about it. Or you're very open. So because I'm very open, if I say I'm struggling, and usually that struggle it might be a struggle to get into town on the tube, or transport issues in rush hour when it's particularly busy, that might be a struggle. Um, the tired in the earlier days, the tiredness sometimes did. I always used to equate it to walking through treacle. It did feel that level of tiredness, not just I had a really bad night's sleep and now today
Right.
I'm groggy. It was very much just the fog set in, and just telling people and telling friends as well. Friends and family in the earlier days were, of course, my first and have always still been my support network. And telling them I'm supposed to be going for a day out, I can't do it today, I can't go for dinner, just listening to my body and actually paying attention to it, which I didn't do as much in the early days. But since then, when times do feel tricky, I'm just very open about it.
You said something that I think is very important, something that we talk about all the time on this show, most often with people that don't have any illnesses, and that is a support network. And I think that a
Yeah.
support network is essential for everybody. So talk to me for a moment, because you mentioned it. Talk to me about your support network, what it means to you, both on a personal level and also at a work level.
I think a support network is the most important factor. And my support network also didn't know anybody with MS in the early days. And we have very good charities in the UK, I'm sure in the US as well, where they found resources. Unbeknownst to me for some time, actually, they'd gone out to see how they could support me better. There's a helpline that they could phone, and several of my friends did that to find out for themselves what was likely to go through. And
Right.
I think that's just testament to having great friends and family. who do understand. And as I say, in the early days, I didn't really try and do more than perhaps I should have done. But they'd say, "You don't look like you look a bit tired. I think maybe you should call it a day today, or you should cancel today." But they've stayed with me throughout, and there's been stays in hospital. So the treatment that I had was a very hard-hitting treatment at the time, a form of immunotherapy. So I was in hospital for 5 days the first year, and then 3 days the second year. And then in amongst that, there's lots of MRI scans, there's lots of appointments, and just having people. And I'm very, very independent, so most of those I did by myself because I thought, no, I don't want to put people out. But having people, having the offer there, just having people at the end of the phone, if I just said, oh, this MRI scan lasted forever and I felt very groggy after it, having those people there personally have kept me on the straight and narrow. But certainly through work, it's so important to be in a role where you feel comfortable to be yourself, warts and all. So the full true self of your character being present in your role. And
and
that's kind
yeah,
of, I guess, surrounding yourself with the right team, the right line managers
yeah,
is how you do that, I would say.
I'm just curious, you know, and just push back if you will. I got the feeling that the culture in the UK is more like, okay, let's keep this private. Let's keep this quiet. We don't need to discuss, what our illnesses are and how it affects us. By the way, I don't know why it's why I think it's only limited to the UK. It's that way, I think, in the US, but for some reason it stands out in my mind more in the UK. I mean, am I right, or do I have it wrong?
No, definitely. It's the stiff upper lip, as we always used to say about Brits and about English folk, showing the stiff upper lip and keep calm and carry on. Um,
Keep going to carry on, right?
and yeah, that's always sort of been how
Right,
things have worked, I would say,
right, right,
culturally.
right.
But I think two things, I guess, would change that. One is the Equalities Act, which is legislation that protects you if you declare a condition or a disability. So to get the benefit of that, you have to have told your employer, of course. You can seek reasonable adjustments. That's the law. So if you are upfront, you get those steps put into place for you, whatever they may look like. I fortunately haven't needed any, but obviously some people do. You need assistance to move around, whatever it might be, a space to do your work in the office. So I think that's a huge factor. And also, I think there is more of an importance of speaking out now. Generally,
Sure.
the culture is shifting because of
Yes.
mental health problems and obviously the horrendous impact of those. There is more of a push to get people talking, which I
Sure.
think is a really good moment to in the culture here.
So you said that the diagnosis caused you to ask yourself, "Why wait?" And
Yeah.
instead of pulling back, you started going the other way, and you started running half marathons. You competed as a para rower in the, British, rowing indoor championships. You learned to tap dance.
Yeah.
I have to ask, tap dancing?
Not very well, I have to say. Learnt is maybe stretching it, but I did go to a few classes because I thought, well, I can use my feet in the same way as I could before. Let's do that. Let's make sure that I've ticked off the almost kind of mobility bucket list, I would say. And thankfully, it's still very stable, and I can still do all of those things. But that was my initial reaction. And I also, with the para rowing, I thought, as well as doing things without putting them off, I'm going to do things that I can only do now because of the diagnosis. So the indoor championships with the rowing, I'd looked at trying to get into the Paralympic squad for on the water rowing too.
Oh, wow.
COVID didn't help with that. So the
Right,
lockdowns of COVID didn't help, but I was in conversations to do that as well, triggered very much by this whole attitude of, well, I can only do that because of the MS. So
right,
let's look at that.
right. And do you so you continue to have that mind shift? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's now I feel it in every aspect of my life. I don't really put things off as much as maybe I would have done. And then of course I try and do too much, and I was meant to be running a marathon a few months ago, and through nothing to do with the MS, it was through surgery, foot surgery that was needed. So I still maybe go a little bit too far sometimes. But yeah, still very much have that
By
why wait
by the way
mentality.
you just said something that, reminded me of an experience I had with my mother. When she went to see her doctor 2, 3 times a year, her MS specialist,
Mm,
she considered that doctor her doctor. He did everything, and everything that she complained about, he connected to MS, and the mistake was, and I think you brought it out when you just said you had a problem that had nothing to do with MS, is that people with MS have other issues that are not related to MS. My mother was ultimately diagnosed with colon cancer, and initially they thought whatever symptoms she was having was related to MS.
And that sometimes is tricky. Yeah, very much. You can be misdiagnosed because of this expectation, either in yourself or in your medical team, that, oh, something else, it must be connected to the MS because the types of symptoms are such a disparate group. So yeah, it's very much not mutually exclusive. There's very many other things that can be going on. I think some people possibly get into a mindset who have MS, maybe get into a mindset of thinking everything is connected to their MS, and it of course then triggers negative thoughts of, oh, this has happened, and it might be getting worse. This is a new symptom. I'm just the opposite, and I always think that can't be to do with the MS. If something else happens, I think no, it must be something completely separate until somebody tells me otherwise. But it's an interesting point. Yeah.
You've been pretty open with your employers about your MS from the start.
Yeah.
That takes a certain amount of confidence. Was there ever a moment of hesitation?
I think in the early days when it didn't have a name, it was worse because I could say I'm not feeling very well, but I can't say why because I don't know why. So after the diagnosis, it was easier. There's always an element of hesitancy when I've started at News UK and when I started at CBRE. When do you bring it up? Always knowing that I'd be very open with them ultimately, but when do you bring it up? I think now, within the last few years, I've thought this is my opportunity to use the platform that I have to talk about MS and make others feel more comfortable with their own disclosures and their own diagnosis. So a very quick search from anybody, any prospective employer or anybody else that I come across, a very quick search would tell people that I had MS because it's all over LinkedIn and I'm on the Law Society Council, as you said. So I've sort of gone the other way because if there's any possible good that I can do out of my diagnosis to help anybody else at all, that's really important to me.
Oh, that's really good and really honorable that you do that. You've said that some solicitors are reluctant to declare a disability in 2026 for fear it will hurt their careers. Why is that fear so still alive in a profession that talks about inclusion constantly?
It's a paradox really, isn't it? It is a very inclusive profession, well, increasingly inclusive,
Yeah,
and yet I do know people who won't speak to their employers. And I think it's possibly more of a private practice versus in-house mentality. In private
right,
practice, you're still ruled by the billable hour. If there's any suggestion, implication, incorrect perception that your work will be less than
right.
because you have a diagnosis of whatever condition it might be, or going through something, even if it's something to do with it could be a caring responsibility. People, I think, are sometimes reluctant if they may be passed over for work or for a promotion opportunity because of that. And that, I think, still exists in some firms and some cultures within the private practice world. Less so, I would hope, but I still know of cases where people do say, I don't want to say anything because of that fear.
So to to dive deeper into that, so, there are some firms that will say they support disabled lawyers and some that actually do. So, give us the real version of what the day-to-day life is like when you have a firm that actually does that.
The
Mhm.
reasonable adjustments, as I say, that are a legal requirement in the UK, but sometimes they're buried on websites and you
Right,
have to search.
right,
I've heard people say that to me before. We talk about having reasonable adjustments, but you have to really search for what
right,
that means.
right,
It's front and center at CBRE and many, many other companies. There are employee business resource groups. And I think there's a difference. And I always use this example. When you get a cupcake on International Women's Day, and that's the only thing that ever happens to support women in the workplace, that's not equity. That's not DEI in
a
practice. That's
cupcake.
I always say that because I've
Okay,
seen that happen. And you see a big post online and then nothing else for the
right,
rest of the year.
right,
It's similar in the disability world. It was MS Awareness Week in April, and you see lots of people talk about it. And then throughout the rest of the year, it's good to see. You can always tell. You can always track it on LinkedIn whether firms really do buy into this and they
right.
continue to talk about
Interesting.
disability, or if
Really
it's just a
interesting.
cupcake.
So you also sit on the Law Society Council, and before I ask you the question, I just want everybody to know that the Law Society Council, I think, is kind of like the Bar Association, except you do a little bit more policy making and other guidelines to for lawyers to go by or solicitors.
Yes, that's
I
right.
get that.
Yes,
Yeah.
And judicial reviews of government
Right,
legislation,
right.
all of that is run through the Law Society. Yeah.
Honestly, how much of what gets discussed about disability inclusion translates into something that changes a real lawyer's life and how much stays on the agenda?
I have, as I said before about my platform, I use my platform wherever possible to try and affect change, which sometimes is successful, sometimes, of course, isn't really. But it's sometimes things that people don't think about.
Yeah,
It could be, I know we've had graphics before where you have a presentation, you have graphics, and I'll say, can I just stop you?
right,
Graphics, first off, do not help somebody with a visual impairment. They also don't help somebody who has color blindness. You haven't thought about this. They're very easy wins that sometimes are just missed because people just don't think about it. So the
right,
way to change that narrative is to have disabled people involved in the conversation before
right.
any policy is launched. Have somebody cast an eye over it, have somebody look at this to make sure that it makes sense to everybody. There's a post on LinkedIn that has lots of emojis in it, might look very pretty, but those emojis don't work very well on text to speech software. So
I
things like that that people
yeah,
don't really think about.
you're very well versed in what's going on in the UK with respect to disability inclusion. You've talked about the solicitor's qualifying exam, the SQE, and concerns
Yeah.
about whether it's truly accessible for candidates who need reasonable adjustments. So, can you give me a specific example of what it actually looks like when it goes wrong for someone?
I think the mindset has shifted within the SRA and within the delivery of the SQE examinations from people seeking an advantage to people seeking a level playing field, which is
Right.
what that was always the case.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
always why people have done that. But
Right.
when people ask for extra time to complete their answers, the expectation, I think, previously, because it was untested, maybe in fairness, but the expectation was that that meant somebody just wanted an easier ride, and that's not at all how it was. There's still changes that need to be made because there are very few test centres across the UK, across England and Wales. So it's difficult enough if you don't have a disability or a condition to travel hundreds of miles to your nearest test centre. But if you factor in somebody who has mobility issues, it suddenly becomes an even trickier conversation. So whilst I think there's been huge improvements in reasonable adjustments in the room, there's still a kind of structural change that we need to look at within the delivery of the SQE exams.
Sure, sure, sure. Now, you've said networking should be a survival tool, not just a career progression tool, especially for disabled professionals. Most lawyers think of networking as wine and cheese or whatever it is at a bar event. What does a genuinely supportive professional network actually look like?
In my experience, the best networks I've had have been maybe ad hoc meetings, one-off meetings that have turned into real friendships, and that's
Right,
the testament to a very good
right.
networking.
I
I
agree.
I think sometimes, especially if you're new to networking, you're thrown into a room where you don't know anybody. There usually is wine and cheese and nipples on offer, and you think, "How do I start with this?" And that comes across. If you're going in thinking these conversations will be artificial, I'm not going to
Right.
get anything out of this, and worst of all, I have nothing to offer this room of people. That's the wrong mindset, and you will probably end up leaving that room with no wondering why on earth you wasted an evening. If you go into a group that have a similar view to you, it could be disabled solicitors, it could be women's networking, it could be something, a group that have a connection, there's already a shared experience or a shared interest that starts you off on the right footing. And then you share your experiences and you learn so much. And it's from everybody. I've learned probably more from trainees and junior lawyers than I've learned from more senior lawyers in those sessions.
Amen to that. I talk often about how, especially to younger lawyers, I tell them, listen, you network. Don't worry about trying to meet other lawyers. Worry about going to a network where people don't think you're coming to get business. Because
Yes.
often that's what happens. You go to a network event where there's, in your case, solicitors, in my case, lawyers who just want to tell you what their verdict was or how much money they got or something like that. Instead of, why don't you just go to the neighborhood organization where they're having a networking meeting or something like that, where if that's what you're interested in, if you're interested in playing a sport, go there and you'll meet
Yeah.
more people who will look at you authentically as opposed to being transactional. So Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said. In the States, we have the ADA,
Yes.
the American Disabilities Act, which creates
Yeah.
legal obligations and accommodations. How does the UK framework compare? And do you think the legal structure actually changes the culture, or does culture have to come first?
That's a very good question. I think culture should come first. It should be that you want to do the right thing because you want to do the right thing, because you're giving people the opportunity to thrive, mindful of the fact that diversity of thought, diversity of people is the best way to run a
Mhm.
mixed and very successful progressive company. But I think in and some companies, ours is very much one of those, some companies really do that. Some companies, on the other hand, I think are led by the fact that the law says you have to do certain obligations, you have
Sure,
to offer certain benefits and or certain adjustments and certain requirements for disabled people. And those are the firms where, to go back to my earlier point, people don't want to even say they have a disability. Because if that's the phrase, if you get that impression from policy documents that you
sure.
see, or the fact that you have to spend 10 minutes searching for the reasonable adjustments program, that's not supportive. So the culture should come first. And I've spoken quite a lot previously about how disability should override competitiveness within the legal industry. Is something we should all work together and take ideas from each other on. It shouldn't be used to point score one huge magic circle firm against another. It's something where everybody should come together in working groups around a table to say, how are you doing it? Or we're doing it this way. Can we share ideas to make sure that we perform the best and we draw everybody in?
So, you work in a very high stressed, what appears to me to be a very high stress job where you're constantly in, I'm sure, meetings, conferences, you're zooming with people, you have to review contracts. If you're having a bad day, or you're having several bad days, or you're having a bad week, tell me how that works. What do you do? How does your employer react?
Best thing for me to do is to just be open and just say, today I'm struggling. I know I've got these time frames and these time scales to adhere to. I'm just not going to get it done. And that's very rare, I would say, actually, because I make sure that just in case something happens, if I feel like there's a relapse coming on, I build in extra time and manage expectations that way. But that's where it's important that you have both a supportive leadership group, a supportive line manager, and a supportive team who can pick up for each other. I've done it for people, people will do it for me. If
Sure.
you're a very team spirited
Right.
group of people, that's the way that success lies, I would say.
Well, I'm sure your employer knows that you're a great asset to them as well. And so when you have a great asset, you want to make sure that they know that they're being seen. And when things are difficult, they're there to help. Talk to me for a moment, and as comfortable as it is for you, and it's okay if you don't want to talk about your own personal situation. I'm sure that, like other lawyers, there are moments that you get burnt out. You have obligations maybe at home. How do you balance that work life, right? That's something that you've toyed around with. So tell me more about your life work balance.
I do always say life work balance because I always say life comes first. And if you're happy and supported and well in as an individual, then the work will follow naturally from that. So I do always say that. But of course, work life balance is a general term that's more widely known. One of my colleagues refers to this actually. She talks about buckets of time. So there's a time for family, there's a time for work, and there's a time for yourself and your activities that you enjoy doing and your interests outside of both of those things.
Hmm.
And sometimes those buckets are at different stages.
Hmm.
There's family obligations. My parents live
Hmm.
quite some way away in Cornwall, far away in the southwest of England. So I have been looking after them from time to time. That then takes precedence.
Right. Sure.
So sometimes there's an imbalance. Training for the marathon, I would say probably the interest side
Right.
was higher
Right.
than the other two times. But I think it's all about just finding a structure that works for you, and that is very individual. I choose to do things this way. I the person who will check my emails on holiday in the morning briefly, just because I want to know that everything's under control and I didn't need to be doing anything. But that's what works for me. It's very individual.
It is, but I often hear, lawyers, not only younger lawyers, in fact, more of the older group, people my age, who say that when they leave work, they don't bring it home, and they don't bring home to work. And I said, excuse my language, I said, "Bullshit."
Yeah.
That you can't you can't, have a horrible fight with your spouse or partner, whatever it is, and then go to work and everything is fine. It's just, unless you're a superhuman being, that's not going to happen. And if you get a horrible event at work, whether it's somebody got fired, or you lost a lot of money, or you lost the deal, or you did something great, that doesn't come back home. It's one
Yeah.
life, it's 24 hours, it doesn't get broken up into different parts for purposes of how you feel. But the idea is to be able to check in with yourself every so often to see, okay, I haven't really spent a lot of time with my kids. So now maybe I have to do some shifting and spend more time with them. The idea is to constantly hold yourself accountable and see what's going on in your life. So it sounds
Yeah.
like that is what you're saying, that you have different buckets. Like, we get it. There's different roles you play during the course of a day, but you do have to check in and see what needs to be done at any given
And
moment.
I think our profession is for better and worse. Worse in about what I'm about to say, I suppose. We always feel like we're letting ourselves down because we are the true ultimate perfectionists. So there's so many times when you think I could have done a better job of that in work and personal life. I wish I'd done more of that. I wish I'd spent more
Yeah.
time doing that. And that's constantly something that we grapple with as lawyers, but I guess a lot of people do. But as the
Mm.
archetype of perfectionist, we do struggle with that. And I think it's important to keep that perspective. I think, as you say, it's if you are framing yourself as one person at work, framing yourself as a different person with family, that's never going to succeed.
Sure.
And that again goes back to the culture of your workplace, to be honest. If you are in a workplace where you are in collegiate, collaborative team, where you have a chat and you get on as well as being colleagues, that's the best way to get the best out of people, I would say.
So you've been very generous with your time, and I want to be respectful of that. I have 3 questions that I ask everybody that comes on this conversation, and I'd like to throw them out to you. They're pretty straightforward. So, question number 1, somewhere there's a faded Polaroid picture of you as a kid, and so the question is, what would you say to your younger self knowing everything that you know now?
I think keep with the dream. It felt like a bit of a pipe dream at that age because, as I say, I didn't know anybody in the law, but stick to it because you will ultimately get to the point where you're very happy with work and with life. So
Okay.
keep at it, keep working.
Second question is, for a young lawyer right now who is managing something hard, something invisible that nobody around else can see them. What's the one thing that they can do to stand out as being that one lawyer?
When you are dealing with something, whether it's an illness or otherwise, you probably build up a resilience that you don't even yourself think about really. And that's something that you have that other people won't have. You have this resilience, this can-do attitude. Play to your strengths. If there's something that you can't do in the same way, you just really can't do in the same way as you did previously. Acknowledge that. Think of a different way of doing whatever it might be, and also be kind to yourself
Ah,
because you have this resilience and you can do it.
great advice. And finally, is there someone in your life that you've lost, either professionally or personally, that you'd want one more conversation with? And if so, who is it, and what would you say to them?
My godmother, I would say, I used to call her grandma because we were very, very close. She got me into a love of the 1950s and 60s,
Oh,
which I've kept to this day.
me
Old
too, by the
films,
way.
old music. Just this is the best era, particularly the 60s, the best era. So yeah, I think I'd thank you for introducing me to that, which has stayed with me. And that's what I do most of my free time. I'm usually doing something to do with the Beatles if it's not working or running
That's
or
great.
out and about.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. If somebody wants to get in contact with you or speak to you, is there a way for them to do that, either social channel or some way, other way?
I say start with LinkedIn, for sure. There's lots of Alex Wilsons out there, but hopefully you'd come across the right one eventually. But yeah, more than happy to have conversations with anybody on any topics at all if I can be of any help.
Well, thank you for being here, Alex. I really, really appreciate it. It's been very awakening, and it's great that you're here to share your story, because it's a great story. It's a great arc. And I appreciate the time that you've given us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil.
I appreciate it. If something here hits home for you, don't keep it to yourself. Tap subscribe. drop a comment, and share this with a lawyer who needs to really hear it. This is That One Lawyer Podcast. See you next time.